An explosive new report in The Intercept details how the FBI hired a convicted felon to infiltrate Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Denver and basically serve as an informant on behalf of the FBI. Now, Mickey Windecker is the name of the informant they used, and he even tried to entrap some of these demonstrators by goading them to commit acts of violence. Luckily, they were not at all swayed by his calls to violence, luckily, and it did not work. But it is worth learning more about what the FBI was up to as protests broke out in response to the murder of George Floyd in 2020. So let's give you the details. Here are a few important excerpts from the piece. Windecker offered to give the FBI information about protesters. In an internal report, the FBI claimed that Windecker's motivation for becoming an informant was to fight terrorists, and that he believed people who participate in violent civil unrest are terrorists. Now, it's important to note that he himself had a violent past and terrorized many people. We'll get to the details on that in just a moment, but it is telling that he was trying to goad them into violent acts. They refused to engage in that, yet he thought they were terrorists and they were violent.
Yeah, so that has two really interesting components to it. First of all, by his own definition, he's a terrorist, because as you're gonna see later in the story, he's the one that goads them into violence in those actual protests. So that's not my definition, that's his definition, and he definitely falls into that category. Okay, second of all, look at the informant the FBI is sending in. A guy who is so racist that he thinks any protest of the police is a bunch of terrorists who are gonna be violent. And then he constantly tries to goad them into that violence that he claims to be so worried about. So that's a deeply racist informant the FBI used in that case, let alone God knows how many other cases, let alone how he tries to create dissension in the group and destroy the group. It's an amazing story.
No, what was really incredible, and I think this should be a cautionary tale for everyone, but especially the left, okay? Once he infiltrated the group of demonstrators, he started accusing others within the group of being feds or informants. And so that led to distrust, it led to fracturing within the group. It's just really fascinating how he kind of implemented these strategies to destroy the group of demonstrators here. Now, FBI payment receipt records signed by Windecker show that he was paid more than $20,000 for his work during the summer of 2020 when the FBI aggressively pursued racial justice and left-wing activists based on nothing more than First Amendment protected activities. Now, the story of the Bureau's infiltration of racial justice activist groups is particularly relevant right now because House Republicans, of course, want to launch an investigation. They have this new committee, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. It's chaired by Jim Jordan, and it seems to exclusively focus on the FBI's alleged targeting of the right wing. But clearly, there's evidence here that the FBI was targeting left-wing groups, especially as it pertains to the protests that broke out in the summer of 2020.
So the FBI has a deep, deep history of targeting the left, targeting black groups, ethnic groups, etc. And this seems to fit in perfectly, and it is incredibly disheartening that in the, in 2020, as late as that, they're still doing this stuff, let alone if they're still doing it now. But guys, it's also a cautionary tale for the right wing and how we treat each other. So do they sometimes use these same tactics in the right? Well, we've covered stories where FBI informants have gone into right wing groups that are much more prone to violence, but still they go and they goad them and they go, hey, would you like weapons? In the case of the left, they're like, would you like a pea shooter? And the left's like, I don't know. In the case of the right wing, you're like, you want missile launchers, shoulder fired missile launchers? They're like, yeah, right, etc. But entrapment is entrapment.
Yes.
Okay, so whether you're on the left or the right, for God's sake, be objective about this. Sometimes they get the right guys, sometimes they get the wrong people, and they target them for the wrong reasons.
So here's one example of what Windecker specifically did on behalf of the FBI. So there was this one rainy summer afternoon after he had already become a paid informant. He met with his FBI handler, Special Agent Scott Dahlstrom, okay? The federal agent clicked on a hidden camera device. Like they meet together, federal agent clicks on the camera device. And then he says into the camera, okay, it is August 28th, 2020 at approximately 4:02 p.m. Special Agent Scott Dahlstrom said into the FBI recorder before handing it to Windecker. The video is part of more than a dozen hours of FBI recordings I obtained, meaning the reporter here, Trevor Aronson, documenting Windecker's work investigating racial justice activists. The FBI agent Dahlstrom asked Windecker if he remembered his tasking orders, which involved enticing a black racial justice activist into committing a felony, which by the way is entrapment. And he said, "Yep, I got it," Windecker said. "Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad."
So I want to give a shout out right now to Trevor Aronson. I mean, wow, what an investigative piece. He's got the tapes on this guy. He's got every kind of evidence and receipts on what the FBI did. It looks to be an impeccable report and with great detail as to how exactly the FBI tries to entrap people. And by the way, there's tons of dangerous groups in America. Yes, tons of extremist right-wing groups who are talking about government tyranny and how you got to use your Second Amendment rights, etc. It's important that the FBI do good work in actually infiltrating those groups, but not goad them into violence. Number one, we don't want the violence. Number two, that's entrapment. I don't care how much I disagree with the right wing or how extreme they are. If they're going to do the violence, great, then catch them, right? But if they're not going to do the violence, don't egg them on like this. Now, in the case of the left wing, they had no intention of doing any violence. And he keeps putting trays of guns in front of them going,
yes, yeah.
You want it? Yeah.
Yeah, so let me give you a few examples, right? So there was one activist who was mentioned quite a bit in this piece. Windecker reported that one local activist, Zeb Hall, used incendiary rhetoric in conversations with other demonstrators, claiming that Hall said, quote, "We need to burn this mother effer down." Windecker also secretly recorded a conversation in which Hall spoke vaguely of violent revolution and a desire to train for combat. Windecker encouraged Hall with fantastical claims of training anti-fascist activists in Iraq and Syria as part of what he called the Red Star Brigade, okay? Now, Zeb Hall didn't fall for it, luckily. The only unfortunate thing that Zeb Hall did was he purchased a gun for Windecker, which he knew he shouldn't have done because Windecker had a criminal past. He was a convicted felon. He did not have the legal ability to buy a gun on his own. He was eventually arrested as a result of purchasing that gun on behalf of Windecker. But in terms of actually carrying out acts of violence, Zeb Hall never did, and he was never arrested for carrying out acts of violence.
In fact, let me give you two more facts about Hall so you know. Because in the beginning, you got the revolutionary kind of talk. I'd be saying, hey, wait a minute, let's track this guy because he says he might do violence, right? So it turned out that when he actually tried to goad him into doing a specific act against the government official, Hall was like, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. And he backed away, okay? And at the point when he bought the gun, the only reason he gave it to him is because he was afraid that if he didn't, that Windecker had so many weapons and kept talking about how he's gonna use them for violence against his opponents and enemies. He's like, I took his money and I had already bought the gun. And by the way, the authorities arrested him 3 years later, like as a kind of a cover your ass operation.
Yep.
Because when Windecker eventually got caught by the activists, they figured out he was the informant, right? Yep. And at that point, just so that they're not humiliated, the FBI was like, yeah, a couple of years later, Hall was dangerous. Oh, he was so dangerous, even though he literally would not do the act of violence that Windecker pushed him to do.
Now, I think it's important to understand what the FBI's, and remember, this is still under Trump's administration, but I don't think it matters, right? I mean, Christopher Wray is still the head of the FBI. So yeah. Same folks within this government agency. It's important to understand how they themselves viewed the demonstrators, and they were incredibly vicious. The FBI's second in command, for instance, David Bowditch, compared the demonstrators to the 9/11 attacks. When 9/11 occurred, our folks did not quibble about whether there was danger ahead for them, Bowditch wrote in a memo. They ran head on into peril, Bowditch described the racial justice demonstrators throughout the country as, quote, a national crisis, end quote, whose violent protesters were highly organized. Agents suspected these demonstrators could fit into a domestic terrorism ideology the Bureau had defined during the first year of the Trump administration as black identity extremism, a controversial, widely criticized catch-all label for any domestic extremist ideology that drew a black following.
Can I just, there are no black groups that call themselves black extremist identity folks or whatever that made up title is. And there are no groups that fall under that bracket. They just made it up, the FBI. Whereas if you go to right-wing extremism, there's like dozens and dozens of groups that say that, hey, violence against the government is justified. Violence against government officials is justified. To my knowledge, there aren't any black groups that fall under that category. And then eventually, the category was so made up and they pushed so hard to get them to do violence and they wouldn't, that they had to put it under a broader umbrella that included white supremacist extremists, etc., which is in reality almost 100% of that category.
Yeah, they started referring to it as racially motivated violent extremism, because let's also keep in mind that while the protests are taking place, one of the other issues that the country is dealing with is violent acts carried out by neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So to have this hyper focus on demonstrators who were justified in their outrage over the murder of George Floyd, while not really focusing much on the white supremacist issue we have in the country, bit of a problem. So they, again, eventually changed their phrasing to racially motivated violent extremism. Now, let's get to Whitaker himself, right? I had referenced that he had a criminal past, which is definitely true here. So according to the reporting in The Intercept, he was a bit of a scumbag for the following reasons. So he has prior arrests in multiple states, Colorado, Nevada, Texas, and Florida for crimes including sexual assault. When he was 20 years old, he had a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old he met at a roller skating rink.
So shocking, this guy really.
Yeah, he claimed he didn't know the girl was underage. She was 14, okay? So he pleaded the case down to a misdemeanor and was sentenced to 180 days in jail. In another case for felony menacing with a weapon in 2001, he stuck a gun in a woman's face and claimed to be a police officer looking for a suspect. That incident resulted in a felony conviction and Whitaker served 2 years. In addition to criminal charges, Whitaker has had 4 protection orders filed against him in Colorado, the most recent in 2021. In a petition for a protection order filed in 2016, a friend of Whitaker's alleged that Whitaker had presented a fake police badge and threatened to kill him and his family.
Yeah, and so his main MO is that he was a snitch. And as always, of course, when challenged, he would say very aggressively, there's 3 things I'm not. I ain't a punk, I ain't a bitch, and I ain't a snitch. Turns out he was all 3.
All 3.
Okay, and so he would use the prison papers from his arrest as street cred. Like, I'm not a fed, I'm not an informant. You see, I was in prison. Yeah, that's where he started snitching for the authorities. And so but one of the times he threatened a woman that he used to date, and she was scared for her life. He looks like he got out of prison by doing more snitching. So they're like, oh, okay, you might have maybe hurt that woman really badly, but you're free to go because you gave us evidence on someone else.
Yep. I gotta say one other thing, and then we gotta wrap this up because we have an interview. But look, guys, the most important thing that you should take from this story is that clearly the feds try to discredit important movements by goading them into violence. Because once you engage in violence, it's real easy to discredit you and what you're trying to accomplish in the country, right? And so keep that in mind. You know, obviously when you see something as horrific as someone getting, basically strangled to death before your very eyes, you get angry. And that anger, that passion could lead you to want to don't engage in that stuff though. Don't engage in any violence whatsoever. Don't let anyone goad you into it, because chances are someone might be doing so to either entrap you or discredit the movement.
All right, my last things are, look, First of all, if there are extremist or violent groups within the left, I want them rooted out immediately. We go to those protests. I don't want anybody getting hurt at those protests. That's insane. We would also get hurt. That makes no sense at all. And if you're a progressive, you should never do violence because it is surrender. It is saying my ideas cannot win, so I have to be a moron and go to violence instead. It is the minute you pick up that weapon, you have said, I'm too stupid to engage in exchange of ideas, okay? That's mainly for the right wing, it's not for the left wing. And if you're a left winger and you're tempted into that stuff, know that likely the person you're talking to is an informant. It's very, very likely. So if you'd like to go to prison for a long time, go ahead and have that conversation. As far as the FBI is concerned, who are they? The right wing now says defund them and they're monsters, and the left wing says this and that. No, the reality is they are a group of people that are different. They're not all a monolith, okay? So my guess is that a lot of the agents of the FBI are right wing. Some of them are probably moderate or left wing, right? And so some of them do great work and actually catch bad guys before they blow up buildings. And they have done that with several right wing groups, and those were actually real, right? And some of them do terrible stuff like this. To me, the worst part of the story was that high level FBI agent talking about American citizens engaging in First Amendment rights who are not at all violent, and the racist, awful assumptions he had about them, and then he goes out of his way to try to ruin their lives, right? So are there people still like that at the FBI? Of course there are. And mainly, they want to catch people, whether they did it or they didn't do it, for notches on their belt so that their career is enhanced and they move up. So be careful, do not engage in any violence, and be careful about these guys trying to destroy your groups from within. Here at TYT, we work to cut through all the establishment media's biases and bring you the news from a factual and progressive viewpoint. Now allow me to introduce you to Ground News, a new tool that you can use to stay informed on what's really going on around the world. Ground News doesn't just bring you the information, it also provides you with an easy to use rating system that measures each article's political leanings, factuality, and gives you complete transparency on who owns the news that you're reading. Like today, I was on their site and I saw an article about some improvements in the ozone layer. And I was a little skeptical because good news about the climate is pretty rare these days. But with over 100 sources originating from an even spread of news organizations, I was confident that what I was reading was true. So score one for Earth. So get the whole picture and break through the corporate media agenda by subscribing to Ground News today.